The prairie wind carried dust and whispers through Silver City, New Mexico, in the spring of 1878, and Josephine Reed knew those whispers were about her when Madame Carver's painted lips curled into something too cold to be called a smile. The Red Garter Saloon had been her sanctuary for 2 years, the only place that had taken in a 17-year-old girl with nowhere else to go. But sanctuary had its limits, and those limits showed through the loosening laces of her corset. "You have until sundown," Madame Carver said, her voice carrying across the empty saloon floor where Josephine swept the same spot for the 3rd time, hoping to appear useful, hoping to buy herself another day. "I cannot have a girl in your condition working my establishment. It is bad for business, and you know how the decent women in this town already talk." Josephine's hands tightened on the broom handle, splinters biting into her palms. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that she had been careful, that she had saved every penny, that she needed just a little more time. But the words stuck in her throat because she knew it would make no difference. Madame Carver's eyes had already moved past her, dismissing her as thoroughly as if she had never existed. The sun hung merciless in the afternoon sky when Josephine walked out of the Red Garter for the last time, her few belongings wrapped in a faded shawl. The main street of Silver City stretched before her, rutted and dusty, lined with false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean away from her as she passed. She felt the stairs like pinpricks against her skin. Mrs. Henderson turned her face away sharply. The banker's wife pulled her daughter closer, as if pregnancy out of wedlock might be contagious. Josephine had $17.30 to her name, a worn dress, an extra chemise, a hairbrush with missing bristles, and absolutely no plan beyond walking until the stairs stopped following her. She headed east, away from the center of town, toward the scattered homesteads and ranches that dotted the territory beyond Silver City's judgmental core. The afternoon heat pressed down on her shoulders, and her feet ached in boots that had seen better days. She had walked perhaps 2 miles when the small adobe house came into view, set back from the road with a well-maintained corral and a barn that looked recently patched. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see a vegetable garden laid out with careful precision. It spoke of someone who took pride in their land, someone who planned ahead. A man worked near the corral, his back to her, mending a section of fence. His dark hat shaded his face, and his movements were efficient, practiced. Josephine almost kept walking, but her feet had begun to blister, and the sun seemed to grow hotter with each step. She had no destination, no plan, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She approached slowly, uncertain, her throat dry with more than just thirst. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice rougher than she intended. The man turned, and Josephine found herself looking at a face weathered by sun and wind, with lines around the eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He set down his tools and removed his hat in a gesture so automatic it spoke of deep-rooted manners. "Madam," he said, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "Are you lost?" Josephine opened her mouth to lie, to invent some story about visiting relatives or looking for work in the next town, but exhaustion and desperation made her honest. "I am looking for any kind of work. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Anything you might need done." His eyes took in her situation with a single glance, but there was no judgment in them, only a quiet assessment. "You have been walking a while," he observed. "Come inside. I will get you some water." She wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of dignity, but her body betrayed her with a stumble. He was beside her in an instant, his hand gentle on her elbow, steadying her without making it seem like charity. He guided her toward the house, and she noticed the way he shortened his stride to match hers. The interior of the adobe house was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the windows were positioned to catch the cross breeze. He pulled out a chair at the wooden table and waited until she sat, before fetching a cup of water from a covered bucket. Josephine drank gratefully, forcing herself to sip slowly when she wanted to gulp. He stood at a respectful distance, not hovering but clearly ready to help if needed. When she had drained the cup, he refilled it without comment. "My name is Fletcher Quinn," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I run cattle on about 300 acres here. It is not the biggest spread, but it keeps me occupied." "Josephine Reed," she replied, setting the cup down carefully. "I was working at the Red Garter Saloon in town until this morning." She watched for the judgment to cloud his features, but it never came. He simply nodded, as if she had told him she had been working at the general store or the boarding house. "What changed this morning?" he asked. Josephine's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, still small enough to hide under carefully arranged fabric, but not small enough to fool Madame Carver's experienced eye. "Madame Carver has standards," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice, "and I no longer meet them." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady but not intrusive. "The father?" he asked finally, and there was no accusation in the question, only a need to understand the situation. "Gone," Josephine said flatly. "He was a gambler passing through town. Made promises that lasted about as long as his winning streak. I have not seen him in 4 months, and I do not expect to see him again." She waited for Fletcher to stand, to politely but firmly show her the door. That was what any sensible man would do. Taking in a pregnant woman with no prospects and a questionable past was the kind of decision that got you talked about, that made you the subject of those same whispers that had followed her down Silver City's Main Street. Instead, Fletcher leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I could use some help around here," he said slowly. "The cooking is passable when I remember to do it, but the cleaning has gotten away from me. The garden needs more attention than I can give it with the cattle needing constant work, and there is mending piled up that I keep meaning to get to." Josephine's heart began to beat faster. "I can do all of that," she said quickly. "I am a good cook. My mother taught me before she passed. I can make supplies stretch, and I know how to preserve vegetables. I have been mending my own clothes since I was 10, and I can clean anything." Fletcher held up a hand, a slight smile touching his lips. "I believe you," he said, "but I need you to understand the situation clearly. I can offer you room and board in exchange for helping with the house and garden. There is a small room off the kitchen that you can have. I will pay you a small wage, nothing grand, but enough to save up for when the baby comes. And I expect honesty and hard work, same as I would from any hired hand." It was more than she had dared hope for, more than she deserved given how desperate her situation was. "Why?" she asked, the word coming out barely above a whisper. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could rob you blind and disappear in the night." Fletcher stood and walked to the window, looking out over his land. 6 years ago, I was barely 18 and newly orphaned. My father had gambled away most of what we had before he drank himself to death. My mother followed him not long after, I think from a broken heart as much as the consumption. I had nothing but this land, and it was mortgaged to the bank. He turned back to face her. "A man named Samuel Crawford gave me a job when no one else would. He taught me about cattle, about managing land, about saving money. He never asked for anything in return except honest work. When he died 3 years ago, he left me a small inheritance. Enough to pay off the mortgage and start building something real. He crossed back to the table, his expression earnest. Samuel told me once that the measure of a man is not what he does when everyone is watching, but what he does when someone needs help, and no one would blame him for walking away. You need help, Miss Reed. I am in a position to provide it. It seems fairly straightforward to me. Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough in the past few months, cried until she felt empty and raw. I will not let you down, she said, meaning every word. I promise you that. I believe you will try your best, Fletcher said. That is all anyone can ask. Now let me show you the room, and then if you are up to it, you can tell me what supplies you need from town for cooking. I will ride in tomorrow and fetch them. The room was small but private, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the garden. It was more space than she had ever had to herself at the saloon, where she had shared a cramped room with 2 other girls. Josephine set her bundle down on the bed and turned to find Fletcher watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate for what he was offering her. "Truly, Mr. Quinn, thank you." "Fletcher," he corrected gently. "If we are going to be sharing a house, formality seems unnecessary. And you are welcome, Josephine. Now I will leave you to settle in. Take your time, rest if you need to. Supper can wait until you are ready." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Josephine sank onto the bed, her hands trembling with relief and residual fear. She had walked out of town with no idea where her next meal would come from, and now she had a roof over her head, a job, and the promise of safety. It felt too good to be true, and some part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Fletcher to reveal some hidden price for his generosity. But as the days passed into weeks, no such price materialized. Fletcher treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect, giving her space to settle in and find her rhythm. She rose early each morning to start breakfast, and he always thanked her as if she had done him a tremendous favor rather than simply fulfilling her end of their bargain. He worked long hours on the ranch, often coming back dusty and tired, but he never complained, never took his exhaustion out on her. Josephine threw herself into her work with determined intensity. She scrubbed the house until it gleamed, organized Fletcher's haphazard collection of supplies into something approaching order, and attacked the pile of mending with systematic efficiency. The garden became her special project. She weeded and watered, planted late-season vegetables, and coaxed the somewhat neglected plot back to productivity. Fletcher noticed, of course. He commented on the curtains she had washed and rehung, the way the house smelled of fresh bread instead of dust, the neat rows of beans and squash in the garden. But his praise was always simple and sincere, never effusive, and Josephine found herself working harder to earn those quiet words of appreciation. In the evenings, after supper was cleared away, they fell into a pattern of sitting on the front porch, watching the sun paint the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and purple. At first, they sat in silence, but gradually, carefully, they began to talk. Fletcher told her about his plans for the ranch, his hopes to expand the herd, his dreams of breeding horses. Josephine found herself sharing memories of her childhood before her parents died, before she ended up desperate and alone in Silver City. She did not talk about the baby's father, and Fletcher did not ask. It was an unspoken agreement between them, a topic set aside as irrelevant to their present circumstances. What mattered was the life they were building, the careful trust they were constructing word by word, day by day. 6 weeks after Josephine arrived, Fletcher rode into town for supplies and returned with fabric, needles, and thread. "I thought you might need this," he said, setting the package on the kitchen table. For the baby. I do not know much about what infants require, but the woman at the general store assured me this was suitable. Josephine stared at the soft cotton fabric, her throat tight with emotion. No one else had acknowledged the baby as something real, something that would need blankets and clothes and care. Everyone else had seen only her shame, the visible evidence of her fall from respectability. But Fletcher saw a child who would need to be kept warm and safe. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick. "This is very kind." Fletcher looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shuffling his feet like a boy caught doing something unexpectedly decent. "Well, we have a few months yet, but I thought you might want to start preparing." "And Josephine, I have been thinking. When the baby comes, you will need help. I can hire someone from town to come out, or if you prefer, we can see about getting you into town to the doctor there. Whatever you need." The idea of going back to Silver City, of facing those judgmental stares while vulnerable and in labor, made Josephine's stomach clench. "I would rather stay here," she said quietly. "If that is acceptable. There is a midwife, Mrs. Kowalski, who lives about 5 miles east. She helped birth most of the babies in the territory, if you would not mind fetching her when the time comes." "Of course," Fletcher said immediately. "Whatever makes you most comfortable. This is your home now, Josephine. You should feel safe here. Your home now." The words settled into Josephine's chest, warm and solid. She had not had a home since her parents died, only places she stayed, places she was tolerated. But Fletcher's small adobe house, with its clean swept floors and vegetable garden and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, felt more like home than anywhere she had been in years. As summer settled over the New Mexico territory with its fierce heat and brilliant blue skies, Josephine's belly grew rounder, and her initial wariness began to fade. Fletcher never made her feel like a burden or a charity case. He consulted her about decisions regarding the house, asked her opinion on which cattle to sell, treated her like a partner rather than a hired hand or a woman he had taken pity on. And Josephine found herself noticing things about Fletcher that had nothing to do with gratitude. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful gentleness of his hands when he showed her a bird's nest he had found, or held a new calf steady for her to admire. The sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, when she told a story about the more ridiculous customers at the Red Garter. The way he always saved the best piece of meat for her plate, claiming he was not very hungry when she knew he had been working since dawn. She told herself it was simple appreciation, natural fondness for someone who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. But her heart beat faster when she heard his horse approaching the house at the end of the day. She found excuses to sit closer to him on the porch in the evenings. She caught herself watching him when she thought he was not paying attention, memorizing the line of his jaw, the way his hair curled at his collar, the lean strength of his frame. It was foolish and dangerous and entirely inappropriate. She was pregnant with another man's child, living in Fletcher's house out of necessity and his goodwill. She had no right to develop feelings for him, no reason to believe he saw her as anything other than someone who needed help. But her heart seemed unconcerned with logic, beating its traitorous rhythm every time Fletcher smiled at her. One evening in late July, a rider approached the house just as they were finishing supper. Fletcher went to the door, and Josephine heard him greet the visitor as Thomas, one of the neighboring ranchers. She stayed in the kitchen, clearing the dishes and trying not to eavesdrop, but voices carried in the quiet evening air. "Just wanted to warn you, Quinn," Thomas said, his voice carrying clear disapproval. "There has been talk in town about you harboring that saloon girl. People are saying it does not look right, you living out here alone with a woman in her condition. Some are questioning your judgment." Josephine's hands stilled in the dishwater. She had known this would happen eventually, that Fletcher would face consequences for his kindness. She had been selfish to accept his help, to bring scandal down on a good man who deserved better. "What people say is their own concern," Fletcher replied, his voice calm but with an edge of steel Josephine had never heard before. "Miss Reed works for me in exchange for room and board. The arrangement is entirely proper and nobody's business but our own." "I am not judging you, Quinn," Thomas said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just letting you know what is being said. Some of the ladies in town are talking about organizing against you. Mrs. Henderson is particularly vocal. She is convinced you are living in sin and setting a bad example for the community." "Mrs. Henderson can believe whatever she likes," Fletcher said flatly. "It will not change anything. Josephine stays, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly instead of gossiping behind my back." "Was there anything else, Thomas?" There was a pause, then the sound of boots on the porch steps. "Just thought you should know," Thomas said, and Josephine heard the creak of saddle leather as he mounted his horse. "For what it is worth, I think you are doing a decent thing, but decency does not always protect a man's reputation." "Then I will have to live without the protection of my reputation," Fletcher said. "Good evening, Thomas." Josephine heard the door close and forced herself to keep washing dishes, to act as if she had not heard every damning word. But when Fletcher came back into the kitchen, she could not maintain the pretense. "I should leave," she said, not turning from the basin. "I have brought trouble on you. You have been nothing but kind, and I am repaying you by damaging your standing in the community." "You are repaying me by keeping this house running and cooking the best meals I have had in years," Fletcher said firmly. He crossed to stand beside her, taking the dish from her hands and setting it aside. "Look at me, Josephine." She turned reluctantly, unable to meet his eyes. He put a gentle finger under her chin, tilting her face up until she had no choice but to look at him. His expression was fierce and determined. "I do not care what Mrs. Henderson or anyone else in Silver City thinks," he said. "I do not care about gossip or reputation, or what is considered proper by people who would turn away a woman in need without a second thought. You have a home here for as long as you want it. Do you understand me? Nothing those people say will change that." Josephine felt tears spill over despite her best efforts to contain them. "Why are you so good to me?" she whispered. "I am not your responsibility. You owe me nothing." Fletcher's thumb brushed away a tear with heartbreaking gentleness. "Maybe I am not doing this out of obligation," he said softly. "Maybe I am doing it because I want to. Because I have watched you work yourself to exhaustion trying to earn your keep when you already do more than enough. Because I have seen you tend that garden like your life depends on it, and turn this house into a home, and never once complain about your situation even though you have every right to. Because you make me laugh, and you listen when I talk about the ranch like it actually matters to you. Because somewhere along the way, having you here stopped being about helping someone in need and became about wanting you to stay." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. She searched his face, looking for signs that she had misunderstood, that he meant something different than what his words suggested. But his eyes were steady and sincere, and there was a softness in his expression that made her heart ache. "I am carrying another man's child," she said, needing him to understand the full weight of what he was implying. "There will always be whispers, always be judgment. People will never accept me as respectable. Then we will face it together," Fletcher said simply. "If you want to, that is. I am not trying to pressure you or take advantage of your situation. I know you came here looking for work and safety, not for anything else, but I think you should know how I feel. How I have felt for a while now, if I am being honest." Josephine's hands trembled as she reached up to touch his face, feeling the rasp of stubble beneath her fingers, the warmth of his skin. "I thought I was imagining it," she admitted. "The way you look at me sometimes. I told myself it was wishful thinking, that I had no right to hope for anything beyond what you had already given me." "You have every right," Fletcher said, covering her hand with his own. "You have every right to hope for whatever you want, Josephine. You deserve to be cared for, to be valued. You deserve someone who sees how strong you are, how brave, how beautiful." No one had ever called her beautiful, not like this, with reverence in their voice and truth in their eyes. The gambler who had fathered her child had called her pretty when he wanted something, but it had been empty flattery, words designed to manipulate. Fletcher's words felt like a gift, offered freely with no expectation of return. "I care for you," she said, the words coming easier than she had expected. "More than I should, probably. More than is sensible given everything, but I cannot seem to help it. You have been so kind, so patient. You make me feel safe in a way I have never felt before." And somewhere along the way I started hoping for things I had no right to hope for. Fletcher's smile was like sunrise, warm and illuminating. "Then hope," he said. "Hope for whatever you want, and if what you want includes me, then I am right here and I am not going anywhere." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. Josephine kissed him back, pouring all her gratitude and longing and careful hope into the press of her lips against his. It felt like a promise, like the sealing of something that had been building between them for weeks, brick by careful brick. When they pulled apart, Josephine felt lighter than she had in months. The baby kicked, a firm thump against her ribs, and Fletcher's eyes widened. "Was that?" he asked, wonder in his voice. Josephine took his hand and placed it on her belly, waiting. The baby kicked again, and Fletcher's face lit up with amazement. "That is incredible," he breathed. "Does it hurt?" "Not really," Josephine said. "It is uncomfortable sometimes, but mostly it is reassuring. A reminder that there is a life growing, that something good can come from everything that happened." Fletcher kept his hand on her belly, feeling the small movements. "May I be there?" he asked quietly. "When the baby is born? I know it is not conventional, but I want to be there if you will have me." Josephine covered his hand with hers. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that very much." The rest of the summer passed in a haze of contentment that Josephine had never experienced before. Fletcher courted her properly, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, carved her a new hairbrush to replace her worn one, sat with her in the evenings and told her stories about his childhood. They kissed on the porch in the twilight, sweet and chaste, building something solid and real. The gossip from town continued, but Fletcher ignored it with the same calm determination he applied to everything else. When he rode to Silver City for supplies, he held his head high and answered questions about Josephine with simple honesty. Yes, she lived with him. Yes, she was expecting a child. No, it was not his. Yes, he cared for her. Anyone who had a problem with the situation was welcome to say it to his face. Most people did not take him up on that offer. Fletcher had a reputation as a fair man, but not one to be pushed around, and his quiet confidence in the face of scandal eventually wore down most of the opposition. Mrs. Henderson continued to cluck her tongue and predict dire consequences, but even her dire predictions grew less frequent as the weeks passed, and nothing scandalous actually happened. In early September, Fletcher asked Josephine to marry him. He did it without fanfare, sitting on the porch after supper with the stars beginning to prick through the darkening sky. He took her hand and said, "I would be honored if you would be my wife. I know people will talk, and I know it is not a conventional situation, but I love you, Josephine. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum when you think no one is listening. I want to build a life with you, to raise this baby together and any others that might come along. Will you marry me?" Josephine's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Fletcher. I never thought I would have this, never thought anyone would want me like this. But yes, with all my heart, yes." They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who passed through Silver City once a month. It was a simple ceremony in Fletcher's parlor, with only 2 witnesses, neighboring ranchers who Fletcher trusted. Josephine wore a new dress that Fletcher had purchased for her, blue cotton that accommodated her growing belly. And Fletcher wore his best shirt, and a look of such happiness that it made Josephine's heart swell. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Fletcher kissed her with a tenderness that promised years of such kisses, a lifetime of love and care. Josephine held on to him, feeling the solid reality of him, the security of being wanted and chosen and loved despite everything. Their wedding night was gentle and unhurried. Fletcher was careful with her, mindful of her condition, his touches reverent and patient. He kissed every inch of her that she would allow, whispered words of love against her skin, made her feel cherished in a way she had never imagined possible. Josephine gave herself to him freely, joyfully, marveling at the difference between this and her previous experience. With the gambler, it had been furtive and quick, something to be gotten through. With Fletcher, it was communion, connection, an expression of the love that had grown between them. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Fletcher's bed, which was now their bed, and Josephine felt a peace she had never known. Fletcher's hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby's movements, and his voice was drowsy and content when he spoke. "I am going to love this child," he said. "As if it were my own blood. I want you to know that, Josephine. This baby will never lack for a father's love." Josephine turned in his arms, pressing her face against his chest. "I know," she whispered. "You have already shown me what kind of man you are, what kind of father you will be. This baby is lucky to have you. I am lucky to have you." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "I am the lucky one," he said. "I found everything I did not know I was looking for when you walked up that road. You have made my life better in every possible way." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the baby moving between them, and Josephine's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had finally found home. The baby came on a cold October morning, 6 weeks after the wedding. Josephine woke before dawn with a cramping pain that she initially tried to ignore, but as the pains grew stronger and more regular, she shook Fletcher awake. "It is time," she said, trying to keep the fear from her voice. She had heard stories about childbirth, about the pain and the danger, and despite Fletcher's reassurances, she was afraid. Fletcher was out of bed immediately, pulling on his clothes with practiced efficiency. "I am going to get Mrs. Kowalski," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "You are going to be fine, Josephine. You are the strongest person I know. I will be back as quickly as I can." He was gone before Josephine could respond, and she heard the thunder of hooves as he rode hard toward the midwife's home. She tried to breathe through the contractions, focusing on the techniques Mrs. Kowalski had described when she had visited the previous week. The pains were intense but not unbearable, and Josephine clung to that, telling herself that women did this every day, that she could do this too. Fletcher returned with Mrs. Kowalski less than an hour later. The midwife was a sturdy Polish woman in her 50s, with capable hands and a no-nonsense demeanor that Josephine found immediately comforting. She examined Josephine, pronounced everything normal, and set about preparing for the birth with calm efficiency. Fletcher hovered anxiously until Mrs. Kowalski shooed him out to boil water and fetch clean linens. But when the labor grew more intense, when Josephine cried out despite her determination to be brave, Fletcher pushed back into the room and took her hand. "I am here," he said firmly. "I am not leaving unless you want me to." Josephine gripped his hand hard enough to bruise. "Stay," she gasped between contractions. "Please stay." So Fletcher stayed, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement when the pain grew overwhelming. Mrs. Kowalski directed and coached, her voice steady and reassuring. And Josephine focused on that voice, on Fletcher's presence, on the knowledge that this pain had a purpose. The baby was born as the sun climbed over the horizon, filling the room with golden light. A boy, red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that flailed at the air. Mrs. Kowalski cleaned him efficiently, wrapped him in a blanket Josephine had made from Fletcher's fabric, and placed him in Josephine's arms. Josephine looked down at her son, at his perfect tiny features, and felt a love so fierce it was almost painful. All the fear and shame and uncertainty of the past months fell away, leaving only this pure, overwhelming need to protect and nurture this small life. Fletcher leaned over them, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Josephine asked, and Fletcher nodded, taking the baby with exquisite care. He cradled the infant against his chest, and Josephine watched her husband fall in love with her son right before her eyes. "Hello, little one," Fletcher said softly. "Welcome to the world. I am your papa, and I promise you are going to have a good life. You are going to be loved and protected and valued. You are going to grow up knowing you are wanted." The baby quieted at the sound of Fletcher's voice, his tiny face turning toward the warmth of Fletcher's chest. Josephine felt tears stream down her face. Good tears, grateful tears. Mrs. Kowalski smiled at the scene, her stern face softening. "You have a beautiful family," she said. "Now let me check on Mother and make sure everything is as it should be." After Mrs. Kowalski had confirmed that Josephine was recovering well and given her instructions for the coming weeks, Fletcher saw her out with profuse thanks and payment. He returned to find Josephine nursing the baby, the infant latched on with determined hunger. "What should we name him?" Josephine asked. They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Fletcher settled beside her on the bed, careful not to jostle them. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "what about Samuel, after the man who helped me when I had nothing? It feels right somehow, passing on his legacy to this new life." Josephine tested the name in her mind, thinking of Fletcher's stories about Samuel Crawford, the kind man who had given a desperate boy a chance. "Samuel Quinn," she said. "I like it. Samuel Fletcher Quinn, if we want to give him a middle name." Fletcher's smile was radiant. "Samuel Fletcher Quinn," he repeated. "Yes, that is perfect." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, but Fletcher shouldered his share of the burden without complaint. He walked the floor with Samuel when the baby fussed in the night, changed soiled cloths with only minor grimacing, and sat with Josephine during feeding times, talking to her about the ranch or reading aloud from the newspaper he brought back from town. Silver City's reaction to Samuel's birth was mixed. Some people softened, seeing that Fletcher was genuinely committed to his little family. Others doubled down on their disapproval, considering the marriage a sham designed to cover up sinful behavior. Fletcher ignored them all with the same patient indifference he had shown from the beginning. What mattered was their small family, growing and thriving on the ranch. Samuel was a healthy, active baby who slept in fits and starts and seemed fascinated by everything around him. Josephine watched him develop with a mixture of wonder and protective love, and Fletcher treated the boy exactly as he had promised, with all the love and attention of a devoted father. When Samuel was 3 months old, Fletcher came home from town with news. He found Josephine in the kitchen, making bread while Samuel napped in the cradle Fletcher had built, and his expression was serious enough to make her nervous. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately, wiping flour from her hands. "Nothing is wrong," Fletcher assured her quickly. "But I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear it from me first." He took a breath. "I ran into a man in town today. He was asking questions about you. Tall fellow, fancy clothes, gambler's hands. He said his name was David Reed." Josephine's blood ran cold. "My father's name was David Reed," she said slowly. "He died when I was 14. Fletcher's jaw tightened. "Not your father then, the baby's father. He gave a false name when he was here before." Josephine sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. She had not thought about that man in months, had almost convinced herself he was a bad dream rather than a real person. What did he want? According to what he told the bartender at the Silver Bell, he heard there was a baby and he has come back to claim what is his, Fletcher said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "I did not speak to him directly. I heard about it from Tom Baker, who thought I should know." "He cannot have Samuel," Josephine said immediately, fiercely. "He has no right. He left me with nothing, did not even leave his real name. He does not get to waltz back in and claim fatherhood now that the hard part is done." Fletcher knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "He will not take Samuel," he said with absolute conviction. "Legally, I am Samuel's father. My name is on the birth record. You are my wife. That man has no claim, legal or otherwise." Josephine wanted to believe him, but fear gnawed at her. She had heard stories about men who used the law to their advantage, about women who lost their children because they had no legal standing. "What if he makes trouble?" she asked. "What if he goes to a judge, claims you stole his child?" "Then I will fight him," Fletcher said simply. "With every legal means at my disposal, and a few that are not so legal if it comes to that. That man abandoned you when you needed him most. He does not get to come back and disrupt our lives because it suits him. Samuel is our son, our family, and I will protect our family with everything I have." The confrontation came sooner than expected. 2 days later, a hired buggy rolled up to the ranch in mid-afternoon. Josephine saw it from the kitchen window and felt her stomach drop. She recognized the man who stepped out, though he was more disheveled than she remembered, his fancy clothes rumpled and his face bearing the marks of hard living. Fletcher appeared from the barn, positioning himself between the house and the approaching man. Josephine grabbed Samuel from his cradle and held him close, her heart pounding as she watched through the window. "Can I help you?" Fletcher asked, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "Name is David Montgomery," the man said, and Josephine recognized his voice, smooth and practiced. "I am looking for a woman named Josephine Reed. I was told she lives here." "My wife's name is Josephine Quinn," Fletcher said evenly. "What business do you have with her?" Montgomery's smile was oily and unpleasant. "Wife, how convenient. I suppose she did not mention that she is carrying my child. I have rights, you know, as the father." "The child has been born," Fletcher said flatly, 3 months ago. "His name is Samuel Quinn, and I am his legal father." "You have no rights here." Montgomery's expression darkened. "We will see what a judge has to say about that. I may have made some mistakes, but that does not mean I should be kept from my own blood." "You made more than mistakes," Fletcher said, his voice hardening. "You lied about your name, made promises you never intended to keep, and abandoned a young woman who depended on those promises." You do not get to call yourself a father when you have done nothing to earn the title." Montgomery took a step forward, and Fletcher's hand moved to his hip, to the revolver he wore when working on the range. It was not a threatening gesture, not quite, but Montgomery noticed and stopped. "I could make trouble for you," Montgomery said. "For both of you. There are people in town who already think your marriage is a sham. I could reinforce that belief. Make life very difficult." "You could try," Fletcher agreed. "But before you do, you should know a few things. First, I have friends in this territory. Ranchers, businessmen, the sheriff. People who know me and trust me. Second, you left town 4 months before the baby was born. During that time, Josephine had no idea where you were or if you were even alive. She was thrown out of her job and left with nothing. The law tends to look dimly on men who abandon women in such circumstances. Third, and most importantly, if you try to take my son, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you regret it. I am a patient man, but when it comes to my family, my patience has limits." The two men stared at each other, and Josephine held her breath, waiting. Finally, Montgomery laughed, but it was a bitter, defeated sound. "You really want to take on another man's bastard?" he asked. "Play father to a child that is not yours." "Samuel is mine," Fletcher said simply. "In every way that matters. Now, I think it is time for you to leave. You have nothing here, Montgomery. No family, no claim, nothing. Go back to whatever card table you crawled out from and leave us alone." Montgomery stood there for a long moment, and Josephine could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to determine if pursuing this was worth the effort. Finally, he shook his head. "She was not worth this much trouble anyway," he said, and the casual cruelty of it made Josephine's hands tighten on Samuel. "You are welcome to her and the brat." He turned and walked back to the buggy, and Fletcher stood watching until the vehicle disappeared down the road. Only then did he turn back to the house, and Josephine met him at the door. "It is over," Fletcher said, pulling her and Samuel into his arms. "He is gone, and he will not be back. Men like that do not commit to anything, especially not when there is easier prey elsewhere." Josephine buried her face in Fletcher's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the safety he represented. "Thank you," she whispered, "for protecting us, for choosing us." "Always," Fletcher said, kissing the top of her head and then Samuel's. "You are my family. There is nothing I would not do for you." The encounter left Josephine shaken for several days, but gradually, as life returned to its normal rhythm, her fear faded. Fletcher had been right. Montgomery did not return, and no legal challenges materialized. Apparently, even a professional gambler knew when to fold. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Fletcher's hard work and careful planning paid off, and the herd expanded. He hired 2 hands to help with the increased workload, young men who treated Josephine with respect and doted on Samuel as if he were their own nephew. Josephine found her place in the community, though it was not the place she might have occupied if her past had been different. Some of the church ladies would never fully accept her, but others, particularly the younger wives and mothers, found her practical advice and willingness to help during difficult times worth more than any concerns about propriety. When Mrs. Baker's twins came early and she was overwhelmed, Josephine showed up with meals and offered to watch the older children. When the schoolteacher fell ill, Josephine volunteered to help, though she had no formal training. Slowly, grudgingly, even Mrs. Henderson had to admit that Josephine Quinn was a hard worker and a devoted mother, whatever her past might have been. On Samuel's 2nd birthday, Fletcher surprised Josephine with a new dress, this one made of soft green calico with lace at the collar. It was the finest thing she had ever owned, and when she protested that it was too much, Fletcher silenced her with a kiss. "You deserve beautiful things," he said. "You work harder than anyone I know, and you make our home a place I actually want to be at the end of the day. Let me give you this small thing." Josephine wore the dress to the birthday celebration, a small gathering with the ranch hands and a few neighboring families who had become friends. She watched Samuel devour his first piece of cake, getting more on his face than in his mouth, and felt Fletcher's arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "More than I ever thought possible," Josephine answered honestly. "Sometimes I think about where I was 2 years ago, walking down that dusty road with no idea where I was going. And then I look at what I have now, and it feels like a dream." "Not a dream," Fletcher said, squeezing her gently. "Real, built on hard work and trust and love. And it is going to keep getting better." He was right. Over the next year, the ranch continued to thrive. Fletcher began breeding horses as he had long planned, and they proved to be in high demand. Josephine's garden produced abundantly, and she began selling preserves and pickles in town, creating a small income of her own that she carefully saved. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic child who followed Fletcher around like a shadow whenever he was allowed. Fletcher taught him about the animals with infinite patience, letting the boy help with small tasks and praising his efforts enthusiastically. Josephine watched them together, her heart full to bursting with love for both of them. In the spring of 1881, Josephine realized she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought only joy, no fear or shame. She told Fletcher that evening after Samuel was in bed, and his face lit up with such happiness that she could not help but laugh. "Another baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby, truly ours." "Samuel is truly ours," Josephine reminded him gently, but she understood what he meant. This child would carry no shadows of the past, no complicated history. This child would be born into a loving, established home, with parents who had chosen each other and built something solid together. "Do you want a boy or a girl?" Fletcher asked, his hand already resting on her still flat belly. "Healthy," Josephine said firmly. "That is all I want, healthy and loved." "The loved part is guaranteed," Fletcher assured her. "Samuel will be a wonderful big brother." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Josephine was grateful for the lack of drama compared to her first. She worked as long as she was able, tending the garden and caring for Samuel, but Fletcher insisted she rest more, hiring a young woman from town to help with the heavier housework. Their second child, a daughter, was born on a clear December morning. The birth was easier than Samuel's, and Fletcher was there again, holding Josephine's hand and murmuring encouragement. When Mrs. Kowalski placed the baby in Josephine's arms, she saw Fletcher's eyes in their daughter's tiny face. "She looks like you," Josephine said, amazed. Fletcher touched the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "She has your nose," he countered, "and your chin. She is perfect." They named her Alina Grace Quinn after Fletcher's mother and Josephine's. Samuel was entranced with his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help with every aspect of her care. Fletcher supervised the interactions carefully, teaching Samuel how to be gentle, how to support Alina's head, how to rock the cradle without being too vigorous. With 2 children and a thriving ranch, life became fuller but no less joyful. Fletcher proved to be as devoted a father to both children as Josephine had known he would be. He treated Samuel and Alina with equal love and attention, never distinguishing between them, never allowing anyone else to do so either. When Samuel was 5 and started asking questions about where babies came from, Fletcher sat him down and explained in simple terms that sometimes families were built in different ways. That Fletcher had not been there when Samuel was born, but he had chosen to be Samuel's father, and that choice meant just as much as blood. Samuel thought about this seriously, then asked, "So you wanted to be my papa?" "More than anything," Fletcher said honestly. "You and your mother and Alina are the best things that ever happened to me." "Good," Samuel said, satisfied, "because you are the best papa in the whole world." Fletcher's eyes were suspiciously bright when he recounted the conversation to Josephine that evening. She held his hand, understanding the depth of emotion that such simple words could evoke. The years that followed brought the normal joys and challenges of raising a family. Samuel started school in Silver City, riding in with Fletcher when ranch business took him to town. Alina grew from baby to toddler to a determined little girl who wanted to do everything her big brother did. The ranch expanded further, and Fletcher took on a partner, a young man named James Hartford, who had worked as a ranch hand and showed remarkable business sense. Josephine's place in the community solidified as the years passed. She was invited to join the ladies' quilting circle, though she suspected Mrs. Henderson voted against her inclusion. She organized a fundraiser for the new church bell and helped establish a lending library in town. Her past became just that, the past, something that defined her less and less as the present grew richer and fuller. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Josephine to Santa Fe for a week, leaving the children with Mrs. Kowalski and the ranch in James's capable hands. It was the first time they had been truly alone together since Samuel's birth, and they reveled in the freedom to focus entirely on each other. Fletcher bought Josephine a silver locket and took her to a fancy restaurant where she felt awkward and out of place until he made her laugh with whispered commentary about the other diners. They walked through the plaza, visited the cathedral, and spent long evenings in their hotel room, reconnecting in ways that the demands of daily life often made difficult. "I would do it all again," Fletcher said one night, holding her close in the darkness. "Every single moment. Walking past you that day on the road was the best decision I never actually made." "What do you mean?" Josephine asked. "I did not decide to help you," Fletcher explained. "There was no weighing of options or thinking through consequences. I saw you standing there, tired and scared and trying so hard to be brave, and there was never a question of turning away. It was just something I had to do, like breathing." Josephine propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "I felt the same way about falling in love with you," she said. "There was no moment of decision. I just looked up one day and realized I loved you, that I had probably loved you from the moment you handed me that cup of water without asking any questions." Fletcher pulled her down for a kiss, deep and lingering. "We built something good," he said when they finally parted. "Against all odds and despite what everyone said, we built something real and lasting." "We did," Josephine agreed, "and we are not done yet." They returned home to find Samuel and Alina had made welcome home signs and convinced Mrs. Kowalski to help them bake a cake. The cake was lopsided and oversalted, but Fletcher and Josephine ate it with expressions of exaggerated delight that made the children beam with pride. Life continued its steady rhythm. Samuel grew tall and strong, showing an aptitude for the ranch work that made Fletcher quietly proud. Alina proved to be a talented artist, filling pages with drawings of the ranch, the animals, her family. Fletcher framed her best work and hung it in the parlor, declaring it as fine as anything he had seen in Santa Fe. When Samuel was 15 and Alina 10, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. It came as a surprise, as they had assumed their family was complete, but the surprise was a joyful one. Fletcher was delighted at the prospect of another baby, and Samuel and Alina were excited about a new sibling. The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, and Josephine struggled with exhaustion and discomfort. But Fletcher was attentive, Samuel stepped up to help with ranch work beyond his years, and Alina appointed herself Josephine's personal assistant, bringing her water and pillows and reading aloud from books to keep her entertained. Their third child, a boy they named Thomas David Quinn, was born in April 1891. He was a large baby, robust and healthy, with Fletcher's dark hair and Josephine's gray eyes. Samuel, now old enough to truly understand the miracle of new life, was awed by his tiny brother. Alina made him a special blanket, her stitches careful and even. Thomas's arrival completed their family in a way Josephine had not realized was missing. With 3 children ranging from newborn to teenage, the house was full of noise and activity and love. Fletcher built an addition to the house, creating more bedroom space, and Josephine planted roses along the front, a symbol of permanence and beauty. In the summer of 1892, the circuit preacher who had married them stopped by the ranch on his rounds. He was older now, grayer, but he remembered them well. "I must admit," he said over supper, "when I married you two, I had my doubts. The circumstances were unusual, and I worried I was facilitating something that would end badly. And now?" Fletcher asked, Samuel on one side of him, Alina on the other, Thomas in a high chair banging a spoon. The preacher smiled. "Now I see I was wrong to doubt. You have built something remarkable here. A true family in the best sense of the word. It gives an old preacher hope." After he left, Josephine stood on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas drowsing against her shoulder. Fletcher came up behind her, wrapping his arms around both of them. "No regrets?" he asked. Josephine thought about the scared, desperate girl who had walked up this road 14 years ago. She thought about all the moments of fear and uncertainty, the struggle to find her place, the hard work of building a life from nothing. She thought about the 3 beautiful children asleep in the house, the thriving ranch, the community that had eventually accepted her, the man whose steady love had made all of it possible. "Not a single one," she said. "You gave me everything, Fletcher. A home, a family, a future. You gave me a chance when no one else would." "You gave me a raisin," Fletcher countered. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, building something without really understanding why. You and the children, you gave my life meaning and purpose. You made this place a home instead of just a house and some land." They stood together as the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared, comfortable in the silence, secure in the love they had built together over years of shared effort and devotion. Samuel graduated from school and took over more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for management. Fletcher was able to step back somewhat, spending more time with Alina and Thomas, enjoying his children in a way he had not been able to when every moment was consumed with survival and building the ranch. Alina, at 16, announced her intention to become a teacher. She had always loved learning, and the idea of shaping young minds appealed to her. Fletcher and Josephine supported her ambition, proud of her dedication and intelligence. She attended the normal school in Santa Fe, coming home for holidays full of stories and ideas. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who wanted to know how everything worked. He took apart Fletcher's pocket watch and managed to put it back together. He built elaborate structures in the barn and conducted experiments in the garden that sometimes produced surprising results. Fletcher indulged his curiosity, answering endless questions with patient thoroughness. In 1898, when Samuel was 20, he announced his intention to marry. The young woman was Mary Ann Sullivan, daughter of a rancher from the next county over. Fletcher and Josephine liked her immediately. She was practical and kind, with a good sense of humor and a genuine affection for Samuel that shone through every interaction. The wedding was held at the ranch, a larger affair than Fletcher and Josephine's quiet ceremony. The whole community turned out, and even Mrs. Henderson, now elderly and somewhat mellowed, offered her congratulations. Josephine watched her son marry with tears in her eyes, thinking about how far they had all come. Samuel and Mary Ann built a house on the far end of the ranch property, and Samuel officially became Fletcher's partner in the business. They worked well together, Samuel's youthful energy balanced by Fletcher's experience and wisdom. Within a year, Mary Ann was pregnant, and Josephine prepared to become a grandmother with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Where had the time gone? It seemed like only yesterday she had held newborn Samuel in her arms, and now he was about to become a father himself. The baby, a girl named Lily Josephine, was born in the spring of 1900. Josephine held her granddaughter and saw the continuation of the family she and Fletcher had built, the legacy of love that would extend beyond them. Elena returned from her teaching assignment in Albuquerque for the birth, and Thomas, now 9, was fascinated by the tiny baby. The whole family gathered at Samuel and Mary Ann's house, 3 generations of Quinns celebrating new life. Fletcher pulled Josephine aside at one point, leading her out to the porch where they could talk privately. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what we have built here. Not just the ranch, though that is important, but this family, these connections. The way Samuel and Mary Ann look at each other reminds me of how we must have looked all those years ago." Josephine smiled. "Still look, I hope." "Always," Fletcher assured her. "But my point is, we started with nothing. Less than nothing, really. You were cast out, and I was a young man with a mortgaged ranch and no family, and look what we created. Children who are confident and kind, grandchildren, a legacy that will continue long after we are gone." "It is remarkable," Josephine agreed. "When I think about that day you found me, I can barely remember who I was then. So scared, so alone. You saved me, Fletcher." "We saved each other," Fletcher corrected. "You gave me purpose and love and a family. I just provided the space for it to happen." They stood together, older now, grayer, but still with the fundamental connection that had drawn them together decades before. The love had not dimmed with time. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by shared experiences and mutual support. Elena married in 1903, a young attorney she had met through her teaching work. Fletcher walked her down the aisle with visible emotion, and Josephine cried through the entire ceremony. Their daughter was starting her own life, her own family, and while it was bittersweet to let her go, there was profound joy in seeing her so happy. Thomas, showing the same independence that had characterized all their children, announced at 15 that he wanted to study engineering. He had been accepted to a program in Denver, and while it meant he would be far from home, Fletcher and Josephine supported his dreams. They had always encouraged their children to pursue their passions, to build lives that fulfilled them. In 1905, Fletcher and Josephine celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Samuel and Mary Ann hosted a party at their home, and the whole extended family gathered. There were now 4 grandchildren, with another on the way, and the house was full of laughter and noise and love. The preacher who had married them had long since passed away, but the current preacher offered a blessing over their anniversary, speaking about the strength of commitment and the beauty of enduring love. Fletcher and Josephine renewed their vows, speaking the same words they had spoken 3 decades before, but with the weight of experience and proven devotion behind them. "I still choose you," Fletcher said, holding both of Josephine's hands. "Every day for the rest of my life I choose you." "And I choose you," Josephine replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "My partner, my love, my home. The years that followed brought the normal progression of life. More grandchildren arrived. Thomas graduated and took a position with a railroad company, though he returned home regularly. Samuel and Mary Ann took over complete management of the ranch, allowing Fletcher to truly retire, though he still spent hours each day working with the horses he loved. Josephine focused on her garden, which had grown to impressive proportions, and on her grandchildren, who adored their grandmother's stories and warm hugs. She taught the older ones to cook and preserve food, passing on skills her own mother had taught her a lifetime ago. In the evenings, Fletcher and Josephine still sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky. They held hands, comfortable in silence or talking about the day's events, the children's lives, memories of years past. "You ever think about that day?" Josephine asked one evening in 1908. "When I walked up your road with nowhere to go." "All the time," Fletcher admitted. "I think about the courage it took for you to keep going, to accept help from a stranger, to trust me when you had every reason not to trust anyone. I think about how easily it could have gone differently. If I had been in town that day, if I had not looked up when you called out, if I had let fear of what people would say stop me from doing what I knew was right." "God must have been guiding us," Josephine said. "There is no other explanation for how perfectly everything fell into place." "Maybe," Fletcher agreed. "Or maybe it was just two people who needed each other meeting at exactly the right moment. Either way, I am grateful every single day." Josephine squeezed his hand. "So am I. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. Love, family, security, respect. You saw value in me when I could not see it in myself." "I saw what was really there," Fletcher said. "Strength, kindness, determination. You just needed someone to recognize it and give you space to flourish. And flourish you did. Look at what you have accomplished. You are a respected member of this community, a wonderful mother and grandmother, a partner who has made every day of my life better." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative conversations on this porch so many years ago. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled for the night, the horses peaceful in their pastures. Inside the house, the furniture they had chosen together, the pictures on the walls chronicling their family's growth, the books and mementos of a life well lived. Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1912, at the age of 58. He had been working with the horses the day before, laughing with Thomas, who was home for a visit, playing with his youngest grandchildren. Josephine woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers even in death. The funeral was attended by nearly everyone in Silver City and the surrounding ranches. People came from as far as Santa Fe to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. The preacher spoke of Fletcher's integrity, his kindness, his devotion to family and community. Samuel and Thomas carried the casket, tears streaming down their faces, while Alina held Josephine's hand. Josephine stood at the graveside and thought about the 34 years they had shared. Not a single day wasted, not a moment of regret. Fletcher had given her everything, had loved her with a constancy that never wavered, had built a family and a legacy that would endure long after both of them were gone. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, watching the family continue to grow and thrive. Samuel ran the ranch with skill and dedication, honoring his father's memory with every decision. Alina's children grew into fine young people. Thomas married and started his own family in Denver. Josephine spent her final years in the house Fletcher had built, tending the garden he had helped her plant, sitting on the porch where they had shared so many evenings. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about his kindness and his strength, about the day he had opened his door to a desperate woman without asking a single question. When she passed in 1920, at the age of 60, she was buried beside Fletcher on a hill overlooking the ranch. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names, the years of their lives, and a single phrase that Samuel had chosen. They built a legacy of love. The ranch continued under Samuel's management and eventually passed to his children. The house remained in the family for generations, and the story of Fletcher and Josephine became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of true love, of choosing compassion over judgment, of building something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. And on quiet evenings, when the New Mexico sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, descendants of Fletcher and Josephine would sit on that same porch, holding hands with their own loved ones, and feel the enduring presence of the couple who had started it all with a simple act of kindness on a dusty road in 1878.